Without further ado, Dr. Jeff Ryan.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get this thing hooked up. Yeah, and
Not an IT specialist.
no. No signal. That's what we're gonna do. Oh no, I can wake it up. I just hooked it back. Oh, it's trying. Source detect. Source detect. Here it goes. There you go. It found me. Okay, let's start this thing. Start at the beginning. All right. We can even see it, maybe. What's going to happen? There we go. Okay. Well, thanks for hanging around to listen to me, and I like the bingo thing. We actually, in grad school, we played this game with this guy, a very famous scientist called Walter Pittman. He taught this course called Plate Tectonics, and let's just say Walter liked to repeat the same words a lot, and so we actually played a game in his class every year called Walter Pittman Bingo. And it was about, you know, the interesting part of this, of course, is Walter didn't know. And so when somebody finally shouted bingo and got the bottle of champagne, he was very curious. I can't go out, I can't promise the champagne. You got to talk to Liz. I'm going to talk to you about one of my more recent adventures with an ocean drilling cruise. And Liz, if you call it a boat, to those people, they get really mad. It's not a boat, it's a ship. Okay. And so first off, taste of science, I guess. Well, what kind of scientist am I? All right. I guess you'd really call me a marine geoscientist. There's a lot of what I do. I'm known to climb mountains and do stuff like that, but a lot of the science I do is really about what happens under the oceans. It's about the rocks on the bottom of the sea. 70% of our planet is under the ocean. So this is a pretty large chunk of the planet to get to know. Keeps me very busy. I'm particularly interested in something called subduction, which is where pieces of the Earth's surface, basically its crust and upper mantle, slide underneath one another. Okay? This is sort of where all the action happens in the world of plate tectonics, which is the sort of governing theory of geology. If you want to know where all the big earthquakes happen, think Fukushima, think Indonesia, Sumatra earthquakes. Those are all subduction zones. So the really big, dangerous earthquakes happen here. If you want to think about all the big, nasty volcanic eruptions that occur in the world, subduction zones are where they all occur. All of this stuff happens there. So this is, in terms of hazards, which is the theme of the night, subduction zones are where the hazards are at, okay? And of course, where do we live? If you look around the Pacific Ocean, you have what? Seattle, San Francisco, Tokyo, Vancouver, just keep going, big cities, all sitting on top of subduction zones. So this is we are as a species attracted to these things, okay? The other thing that's interesting is almost all the world's major economic mineral deposits are created at subduction zones, and so there's other reasons to want to be there as well. I'm working on one that's far away from here, but it is properly an American subduction zone. The Mariana Subduction System, okay? Piece of Google Earth here. Mariana Subduction System is in the box. The other two subduction systems in the United States are the Cascades, think Seattle, and the Aleutians, think Alaska, okay? Those are the other two. This one is further afield, but it is still a U.S. subduction system. At the southern end of it, you have Guam, U.S. territory. You have the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands, U.S. territory. Okay, so this is a place that's you can go. Interestingly, to get to Guam, you have to go to Japan. There's not very many direct flights these days. The Japanese think this is like the greatest tourist area in the world. And so if you go there, you're going to be buried in Japanese nationals coming down for the beaches and whatnot. And it is very, very pretty. How is this put together? Well, here's a famous place that maybe you remember from middle school or elementary school, the Mariana Trench, the place with the deepest ocean floor. There you go. Already. Okay. The deepest ocean floor on the bottom of the ocean, 37,000 feet deep. Okay. There are also two submarine mountain ranges in the Marianas. One is the Mariana Islands. We only see the tippy tops of them. Those are the volcanoes. The tops of the active volcanoes that make up the Mariana Arc are the Mariana Islands today. And behind them is another actual mountain range. It's submerged now because it's actually gotten old and it's gotten eroded down. The Western Mariana Ridge, that was an arc too. So there are actually two different volcanic arcs that split open. And in between, we now have an ocean ridge called the Mariana Trough. Okay. And so it's an interesting place to work because you got a lot of geology going on here. Here's a color-coded topographic map, or if you like, bathymetric map of the ocean floor. And you can see the Mariana Arc here, you can see the Mariana Ridge here, and all this sort of stripy stuff in here is the actual ocean ridge in between them. But if you look closely, where I've got all the little pins here, there's actually another little mountain range out there. And this mountain range is comprised of 1 to 2 mile tall volcanoes. These volcanoes don't erupt lava, they erupt mud. These are mud volcanoes. And the mud they erupt is made primarily of one mineral, a mineral called serpentine. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about serpentine. It's a very strange mineral. These are unique unto the world. There is no other place on planet Earth where these things occur. So the Mariana Subduction Zone, the American Subduction Zone, has this unique suite of rocks, or this unique mountain range that we really don't understand why it's there. It's been a source of curiosity ever since it was discovered back in the early 1980s, and we've now actually been there 3 different times with major research expeditions to look at it. The most recent of which was the one I was on just recently, the International Ocean Discovery Program Expedition 366. And I don't figure very many people in this room know what the International Ocean Discovery Program is, so I've got a couple promo sheets here. This is, and you get this, with geologists, we like acronyms. So we don't really ever say this, we say IODP. IODP used to stand for International Ocean Drilling Program. They just changed a word. And this is what's happened over the many years that this has been around, is we keep changing the name. But it's the same program. It started in 1966. It has been running since then. It is the longest running, largest geoscience research effort on Earth today. It involves 20 different countries, hundreds and thousands of people over the years. There are 3 different, they use the term platforms, but what they really mean are ships. There are 3 different ships that are involved in this ocean drilling effort. One of them is owned by the Japanese. It's called the Chikyu. It's a really big vessel for drilling really deep holes. The Europeans contribute various vessels to do specialized things. They just recently drilled through the KT boundary in the Chicxulub crater area with a special ship. And then there's the workhorse, which is run by the United States, called the JOIDES Resolution, which is managed by us. And this is the JOIDES Resolution. It's a pretty good sized ship. About 470 feet long, 70 feet wide. It's got a big hole in the middle with a 200-foot derrick sitting on top of it. It's a drill ship, okay? It doesn't moor. When it goes to drill, it's not moored anywhere. It actually has a dynamic positioning system. It has lateral thrusters, so it stays positioned systematically above the place that it's drilling to keep that drill string vertical. Drill pipes don't really like bending, so you got to keep it vertical, and this can do it to within a couple % of the height of the string. And it can go down very deep. The maximum depth, and the maximum depth of this is really determined by how much pipe can they carry. And the amount of pipe they can carry can get them down 8,000 meters, which is close to 27,000 feet. And so you can go a long way down with this ship. The stuff I was doing wasn't quite that difficult. You got the derrick, then you have a 7-story building right next to the derrick, which they call the science stack. What that is a stack of laboratories where you work on the samples as they come in. It isn't just drilling it and bring it up. You're actually doing science, you're actually doing measurements on these things. You're doing physical properties measurements and a whole bunch of other different things as the samples come up. So a tremendous amount of information is collected about this material as it's brought on board and then ultimately stored in the hold. It's stored at ambient seawater temperatures. So one of the things about this ship is it's always freaking cold because you've got 2 degrees Celsius, or if you like about 36 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures in the hold all the time, and that just percolates right up through the ship. So even if you're in the tropical Pacific where I was, you're freezing your butt off. Okay? When it's fully staffed, you have 115 people on the ship. That includes the science team, which is about 60 total, about 35 international scientists plus technical staff. Then you've got the drillers, who are their own really interesting world. You've got the sailors, the folks who actually run the vessel. And then you have the people who cater and actually run the galley. They're contracted out. And interestingly, they're almost all from the Philippines. Something about the Philippines and sailing. There's a tremendous, you eat really well on this ship. The Filipino cuisine is really pretty magnificent. So, yes.
The drill string that you put down there,
Yeah.
is that essentially rotated at the level of the ship?
Yes.
So you've got
It's rotating. You have 2 to 3 miles of pipe that's rotating. All the way to the bottom. Huh? Oh, okay, I can do that. Yeah. He was asking about the drill string that comes down. How does it rotate? And the answer is it rotates from the top. So it's rotated at the top, and so it's actually going 3 miles down, and you actually rotate the thing all the way down. And so to get it to drill, you've got to actually spin it from the ship. That's another thing the thrusters do. It keeps the ship from going the other way. Okay. So why care about these serpentine mud volcanoes? I mean, I'm a geek. You just won bingo. I mean, you know I'm a nerd. Okay? So I just think they're cool. But there's really good science behind this, okay? And I promise you, I'm going to show you one chemical equation and one data diagram in this whole talk. That's it. This is the chemical equation. Basically, and you don't have to read the chemistry. Serpentine, which is what this stuff is made of, is made by adding water to the mantle, which is the Earth's deep interior. So you're adding water to the mantle, and you get serpentine, and it erupts out of volcanoes out here in the Marianas, okay? And this is how we think it looks, is that this stuff is actually coming up from where the two crustal plates actually interface, okay? And so they're telling us about this really fundamental process of taking water from the Earth's surface and shoving it back down in the planet, okay? That's how you make explosive volcanoes. That's how you get giant earthquakes. The water facilitates all of this, and if we can understand how the water goes back, then maybe we can understand how these things happen, and we can prepare for them, okay? The other thing that's really intriguing, they erupt serpentine mud, which is weird. They erupt waters, fluids that come up with it. They erupt rocks from the downgoing plate, and they erupt natural gas. There's methane, lots of methane in these things, lots of ethane. Basically, when you turn on your stove, if you have gas stove, you get out what's coming up in these things. And we don't know why it's happening, okay? It's producing natural gas. Under normal circumstances, we make natural gas by essentially fermenting dead things in the deep interior of the continents, and here we're making it in the middle of nowhere. So we're very curious as to why this is happening. And not only are we making it, but there are things that have evolved to eat it. There are these unusual biological communities that live on top of these things that no one sees seen anywhere else in the world that live on methane. And so we're thinking, well, how can, what is this telling us about the origins of life and how does life develop? This is a unique laboratory for looking at these kinds of things. And so a very fascinating site. We drilled 3 of them to get some information. There's a bunch of them. There's probably about 30 of these mountains. Give you some sense of what we did. They're all pretty good sized edifices, and we drilled a couple different sites in them to try to get some good sampling here. Somewhere in here I have a picture, here it is, of the people, okay? Who was on this ship? It wasn't just me. You have people interested in all the different things that I just talked about. You have a science team that includes people they call petrologists. A petrologist is someone who studies rocks, not petroleum, rocks. And these people were interested in the rocks that were coming up from the Earth's mantle, and they were interested in the rocks that might be coming from the downgoing plate to understand the sort of dynamics of eruption. They were people we call geophysicists who were interested in how heat moves through this and how water moves through this and what the porosity changes were. There were people like me. Liz described me as a geochemist. I spend my time measuring the compositions of things. And so I was there along with people who are gas geochemists trying to understand this crazy hydrocarbon, natural gas coming out of this. And then there were the microbiologists. So we had biologists, geologists, chemists all on the ship trying to understand this really weird place where all of this stuff comes together, okay? And what do we do every day? First thing, you watch the drillers. The drillers control the show because they're sending the pipe down, they're bringing the cores up. And several times a day, a shout would go out over the PA system, "Core on deck!" And when you heard that shout, didn't matter where you were, even if you're in the bathroom, you ran. You went up to catch the core. And you brought that core in, okay? And because this is like going to the moon. I mean, no one's ever seen these rocks, right? And so as a geologist, we're all just, what is it? What's it gonna be? And so everybody's out on the catwalk outside looking at this core as it comes up. It comes up in a big plastic liner. And we're characterizing it, and then the core gets cut up to be brought in, and samples are taken out of the core to do things on the ship, and then other samples are taken for doing other kinds of things. All of this is plotted and planned right there for every core that comes up. Whoop, I went the wrong way. Once it comes in, it gets run through a lot of physical tests, and then it's cut open. This is one of the first cores we pulled up. It was all sorts of weird colors. Everyone's looking, what the heck? Okay. So there's a lot of just description of the cores. Then there's details where you actually take samples and you look at fine scale properties in the cores. You measure physical properties of various kinds. We actually take the whole core and slide it through gamma counters and actually seismic experiments to see how it actually transmits vibrational energy. There's a whole bunch of different tests that you do on the cores, all of which is part of the record of these things. And then pieces are taken off. Sometimes you just take it. In the case of some of the muds we got, we just slammed it on a slide and stuck it under the microscope, see what was in it. Sometimes we'd actually cut something to look through a piece of rock, something called a thin section. And so microscopy gets done on all of it. And all this is all different people on the team doing these different pieces of work. And then periodically, about once a week, we'd all get together and just say, what did you find? What did you see? To sort of keep everybody up to speed on what was coming out of the hole so that we all knew where the science was going and where the questions were going to be, because there was so much information being gathered, it was impossible individually to keep up with it. Me, I wasn't up with the core a lot of the times. I was downstairs in the chemistry lab, but I started in the cores because we would take a piece of that core downstairs for every single core. And then my job was to take that stuff out of the core. Basically, I'm in there with a big hammer inside this glove bag, which is full of liquid nitrogen to keep it from oxidizing. And that is actually me hammering out the core. And then it goes into one of these big squeezers where we actually squeeze all the water out of it, okay? Because we're not just interested in the stuff, we're actually interested in the water that's in it too, and the gases that are in it as well. And so those were all being sampled off. My job was to do a lot of squeezing, and I squeezed a lot of cores, okay? Once we squeezed them and we had the water, then that had to be split. A lot of the scientists on the ship want samples of their own to do special things at home. We had to split that off, and we also had to take our sample, but we could do our work on it. And the work we were doing on it involved elemental analysis. We did chemical analysis. This is an inductively coupled plasma emission optical spectrometer that we measured element abundances with. This is an ion chromatograph, which we actually measured anions and cations with in the waters, also in some of the rocks. This is a thing called a portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, or PXRF. Best way to think about this is a phaser for rocks. It's basically a phaser, okay? It looks just like Star Trek, except it zaps it with X-rays, and it can then measure the composition of these things instantaneously, okay? And we were doing a lot of this, okay? Every core we brought up had to be squeezed for water. Almost every core we brought, I had to have a sample taken out of it to measure the muds. We had lots of little rocks that came up in them, and we would use the portable XRF to see what those rocks were, and the really interesting ones we then did full spectrum analysis on. And so ultimately, in 2 months, we measured 200 samples for pore water elemental abundances. We measured 160 rocks for comprehensive elemental analysis, and we did 1,100 rock samples for portable X-ray fluorescence analysis. I was busy. It was a little hectic. It was fun, but it was hectic. Okay? What did we find? Can you see this? It's blue mud. That's pretty much the description. This stuff that comes out of the core, all of these are blue mud. If you cut it open, it's blue mud with rocks in it. The rocks tend to be really dark color, really black. There might be little white things in there occasionally too, but mostly it's this stuff. And this is serpentine. Serpentine is this really weird, colorful mineral. It ranges from green to this really dark blue, and a lot of this stuff was very dark blue, okay? And a lot of it was really messed up. If you look closely in here, I don't know if you can see it from the back, this thing is all very swirly and messed up. This is actually not natural. This is what the drilling did to it. This stuff is really viscous. It's gooey. And so when you put a core piston into it, it actually deforms it. And then when you pull it up, it's like a big syringe. And it just goes up in here. And you can see it in detail that rocks were actually breaking up and pulling apart. So this stuff is just, I don't know what good description for it. It's just glop, okay? But this is what these mud volcanoes are erupting. And so we have core after core after core of it, okay? Now occasionally we get cool things like this, beautiful little clots of crystals just growing out of the core. This is a mineral called aragonite, which the geocerts will know what that means. That's actually related to the stuff most of Florida sits on. It's a mineral that's a lot like calcite chemically. And it grows of its own accord in these cores in some cases. So you know, the first time these came up, everyone said, I want that. Of course, you can't take it home, right? It's an international good, right? Now, if you say, I want to work on that, then you can take it home. I took one home. Okay. And then some cores came up looking like this. You see all the gaps in here? The gaps are full of methane. It's a natural gas coming up with the core. And a lot of these things were upwards of 30% just void space. That's how much gas was in them, okay? You can imagine this made this a little delicate to handle. Once people realized what it was, and of course initially they didn't know, they're saying, well, let's bang us. No! No sparks. Okay, but fascinating, because you know, one of the things then we started to do was actually punch something through there to suck the gas out and try to get a sample right away. And then we had rocks. They're not real exciting. They're really dark. You can see some of the swirly stuff in that big chunk of rock here. I've got a few more I'll show you really quick. Oh, wrong way. Some of the rocks were just in the mud, just jumbled in. Others were really large. So if you imagine, this is a drill, right? It's going down, going down, going down. And so this is stuff that's piled one on top of the other. And you've got rocks in here that are multiple lengths of core segment along. And these core segments are basically like, about 7 feet long. Okay, so whatever this rock was, there was 14 feet of it that we drilled through before we got out of the rock. And those, we had some just that big. How wide? They're probably about 4.5 inches. Okay. A lot of it though, if it got rock, it would come up all fractured and beat up. And the part of the reason for this is it has a lot of fractures and veins in it. The veining is part of the making of the serpentine. And so if you look at this one, you can see that you have a blue vein here crisscrossed by other veins. Serpentine has a really large volume relative to the minerals from which it's being formed. And so it just pushes things apart as it forms. And as it forms, then it creates this lattice of veins. We call them Frankenstein veins because you get the definite feeling of, okay, this looks like the skull of the monster. Okay, just all jaggedy. And then, I mean, you can see that the logical outcome is it just keeps doing this until it just disaggregates the whole thing into this fine mud, okay? And that appears to be exactly what happens. And then we got weird stuff. As if this stuff wasn't weird, okay? We got weird stuff. So this is actually like sand, but it's blue sand and purple sand and yellow sand and orange sand. Why sand? We don't know. This one's one of my favorites. This was just flat weird. So the top of the core is at the top of the blue thing. So whatever it was, okay, we got the blue stuff. Then the blue stuff turned into white stuff. And you can see the syringing effect here, right? And then the white stuff, which turns out, anyone know what plaster's made of? The mineral gypsum is mostly what plaster's made of. That's what the white stuff is. It's full of gypsum. Why there's gypsum there, we're still trying to answer that question. But there was a lot of it. And then we got this weird red stuff, and we still don't know what this stuff is, okay? But there was a lot of it, and it was just this bright blood red. And some of the rocks were bright blood red, and this rock, if you look close, is just pieces of different things all jumbled together, okay? And then we got some weird green stuff. And you look at this and say, these are nowhere near as exciting as those others. Why are you showing me this? Well, this is the GeoGeek, because this green stuff is almost certainly from the plate below. This is the stuff that got broken off the downgoing plate and somehow got spit out of these volcanoes. We're quite certain that that's what's going on here. That's why it's there. And there's only a little of it, but it's definitely there, okay? My one data slide. This is it, okay? And then make it simple. What this is the water. Because all that water I squeezed, I got to show you that, right? Okay. I've got dark things, blue and purple here, are all from two of the seamounts we drilled, the ones that are called Yinazao and Fantanyishna. This is all in Chamoyan. Yinazao stands for blue moon. Fantanyishna means celestial. Okay. And then the other one we drilled is Ashut-Tesoro, which stands for big blue. It's Guam, you know. Okay, you know, so we have to honor the local, I mean, they named them, okay? But, so we got the dark stuff and the red, so you can see that up here is red, here's the dark stuff, red and the dark stuff. And then in yellow are the two others that have been visited by this ocean drilling effort over the years. So South Chamorro, which was south of all of these, was visited about 17 years ago in 2000. And then the conical seamount was the very first that was ever drilled, was in 1988. And we're comparing a couple different elements here, but the key here is that they're not the same. All of these seamounts are really different from one another, no matter where we go, okay? And so we see a few of them overlap in some cases, but then others don't. And what we find is that the chemical fingerprints that were coming out of these seamounts, both in the waters and the rocks, are completely different from one another. And it's not what we expected. We expected regular patterns, and the patterns we saw were anything but. Okay, a lot of variety here, which has got lots and lots of question marks going off in my head and the heads of a lot of my shipmates. And the same thing shows up when we look at the gases. We've got gas data here for the two that we have really good information for, Yinazao, which was one of the shallow seamounts, and Ashut-Tesoro. This is on a log scale, which means that a big change is really big. Okay, and you've got mineable quantities of natural gas in Ashut-Tesoro seamount, okay? If they could put a pipe down and feed somebody's stove. That's how much is coming out. There is some, but not very much in Yinazao, and so there's big dramatic changes in the gas productivity of these things as well, and we don't really, again, have a really good answer as to why that is, okay? And so this has turned up a lot of interesting, dramatic patterns that we're still trying to understand. The thing that seems to be consistent, though, is that a lot of what we're seeing relates to what's happening down here. The changes in the composition of things are reflecting changes that are happening on the downgoing plate. In other words, the shallow stuff is seeing a signal consistent